biography reveals intimate details about the start of Charles and Camilla's 45-year love affair, and his very close relationship with a high-flying blonde. During her 20s, Camilla Shand was considered quite a catch. Along with an upper-class pedigree, she had fine features, a low husky voice, merry deep blue eyes and a fetching figure with a large bust. You could see what a man could see, an intensely warm, maternal, laughing creature, with enormous sex appeal, said Lady Annabel Goldsmith, a family friend. Certainly, Camilla appealed to Andrew Parker Bowles, then an officer in the household cavalry. But so did other women. During his on and off relationship with her, Parker Bowles also enjoyed romances with Princess Anne and Lady Caroline Percy, the daughter of the Duke of Northumberland. Camilla despaired, and launched into a couple of dalliances of her own, first with Rupert Hambro, the handsome scion of a prominent banking family. Then, when she was 25, she caught the eye of the 23-year-old Prince of Wales. Unlike Diana Spencer, she'd had a blissful childhood in a rambling 7-bedroom house, where rows of gumboots stood at attention by the door. Nicknamed Milla, she was an extrovert tomboy, who was mad about ponies and horses. When she was just 9, her father Bruce had introduced her to fox hunting. She took instantly to the thrill of the chase, vaulting the fences with courage and vigor. Like most upper-class girls of her era, she had only a sketchy education. Having left school with just one O-level, she'd gone on to a Swiss finishing school to learn how to roast a chicken and lay a table correctly. Although she had no intention of pursuing a career, she needed to stay occupied, so she then found a job as a receptionist at the prestigious decorator Colfax and Fowler in Mayfair. But her grandmother Sonia Cubitt was concerned that Camilla might not be able to get to work on time. So she rented her granddaughter a room on the top floor of the luxurious Claridge's Hotel, just down the street from Colfax. Once installed there, Camilla started inviting her friends over for expensive Claridge's breakfasts. Jane Wyndham, later Churchill, another Colfax girl, Nina Campbell, then training as an interior designer, and John Bowes Lyon, a cousin of the Queen and of Andrew Parker Bowles. For all her wealth, Sonia was annoyed when she began receiving the exorbitant bills, so she soon put a stop to the morning feasts. If Camilla seemed feckless and footloose, at least she knew what she wanted out of life. And that was marriage and children with Andrew Parker Bowles, all of which seemed further from her grasp as the years went by. That was the uneasy situation in the summer of 1972 when Prince Charles sort of parachuted in the middle, according to her friend of 50 years, Patrick Beresford. The prince landed at a convenient time. In July, Parker Bowles was off to Northern Ireland and Cyprus for 6 months of army service, leaving Camilla to her own devices. What appealed to Charles more than anything was that she talked to him and always listened, said a man who was close to her during those years. In Camilla, the prince found not only a sympathetic ear but also warmth, vivacity, and a goofy sense of humor. When she walked into a room, said Patrick Beresford, your spirits rose, because you know you were going to have a laugh. For a young prince with downbeat tendencies, that sort of personality was catnip. She would go to see him playing polo, and in the evenings they'd slip out to the exclusive Annabel's nightclub in Mayfair. The relationship met with the approval of Charles's uncle Lord Mountbatten, who felt that the earthy Camilla would be a good learning experience for the prince. So the Earl lent them his Hampshire country house, Broadlands, 4 trysts away from the public eye. Both knew their time together was limited. He felt he had to marry a virgin, and according to Camilla's friend Charles Benson, she still had the shadow of Andrew Parker Bowles looming large over her. The affair reached a natural hiatus when Charles, then still in the Navy, left for the Caribbean in January 1973. As for Camilla, she returned to the arms of Parker Bowles. But he still showed no signs of proposing, much to the exasperation of both their families. 2 months later, both his father, Derek Parker Bowles, and hers decided to put an end to his dithering. According to John Bowes Lyon, Andrew's cousin, the two fathers forced the dashing young officer's hand by publishing an engagement notice in the Times on March 15. Camilla was very much in love with him, said Bose Lyon. Her parents were very keen that Andrew should marry her. The game was up. Parker Bowles duly proposed to his girlfriend of nearly 7 years. Charles heard the news while docked at English Harbour in Antigua, and felt blindsided. He now had no one to return to. "I suppose the feeling of emptiness will pass eventually," he wrote to a friend. Andrew Parker Bowles and Camilla Shand were married in a Catholic ceremony at the Guards Chapel in London on July 4, 1973. It was a major social event, with the Queen Mother and Princess Anne seated in the front pew. Afterwards, the couple moved to Bullhyde Manor near Chippenham in Wiltshire, where Camilla settled into domestic routines while Parker Bowles was either deployed with his regiment or doing army work in London. But Charles had no intention of losing sight of his fun and relaxing ex-girlfriend. They spoke while she was pregnant with her first child, and saw each other on the polo field whenever he and her husband were playing. In February 1975, Charles became godfather to her son, Tom, and 2 days later he called the Duke of Beaufort to ask if he could try fox hunting on the Duke's Badminton estate, where Camilla was a regular. From then on, she and the prince regularly rode to hounds together. Not only that, but she became his best friend and confidant, and he ended up buying his Highgrove estate in Gloucestershire partly because it was near her home. For much of 1977, Camilla was pregnant with her second child, Laura, but her marriage had become little more than a sham. By now compulsively unfaithful, the Major carried on so openly in London that he became known as Andrew Poker Bowles. He was a libertine Catholic, said veteran journalist Andrew Knight, who was at Ampleforth boarding school with him. He went to confession and started all over again. Eventually, said a friend of Camilla's, she gave up on him. Sometime towards the end of 1978, Charles and Camilla resumed their love affair. It remained clandestine, but the sparks were noticeable to anyone paying attention. Emma Soames, the sister of Charles's friend Nicholas, once observed the ardent way the prince looked at Camilla when he walked into a party in London. "It suddenly hit me, my God, he's in love with her," she recalled. She wasn't the only one who noticed. A senior palace courtier reluctantly informed the Queen that the Blues and Royals were unhappy that her son was sleeping with the wife of one of their fellow officers. She remained impassive and made no reply, but she put the word out that Camilla was not to be invited to any royal events. The Queen Mother took similar steps, though she was so fond of Parker Bowles that she continued asking him to join her in the royal box at the Cheltenham races without his wife. Neither the Queen nor Prince Philip spoke to their son about his behavior, and Parker Bowles himself appeared to be unconcerned about his wife's infidelity. "He was slightly the victim," said a man in their circle, "but he rose above it. He played the cuckold very well, and I think he enjoyed it." Indeed, Parker Bowles was so compliant that he turned up in Zimbabwe to squire his wife at the independence celebrations. Prince Charles was present, too. He'd actually traveled there with Camilla. During a dinner in Government House on the first night, the lovers were reported to be flirting so openly that a dismayed Edward Adiana, the prince's private secretary, walked out of the room. So content was Prince Charles that it's likely he would have remained a bachelor, had he not felt under pressure to produce an heir. So, in 1981, he married Diana Spencer after she'd been vetted and approved by his accommodating mistress. He insists that he rekindled the affair with Camilla only in 1986, when his marriage was beyond repair. By then 39, she still had a distinctive allure, and she was as non-threatening as she was comforting. After years of his wife's averted eyes and furtive, changeable manner, Charles found much-needed reassurance in Camilla's direct gaze and appreciative smile. Her laughter was throaty, genuine, and complicitous. And, unlike Diana, she didn't try to score points against him. Parker Bowles, for his part, spent weekdays with his regiment in London, where he continued to have indiscreet affairs. When told he was a model for an upper-class bounder in one of Jilly Cooper's bunkbuster novels, he said, "I took it, and continue to take it, as a great compliment." As his love affair with Camilla intensified, Charles made stealth visits to her when Diana and the boys had returned to London on Sunday afternoons. But most of his assignations with his married mistress were at the homes of their circumspect friends across England and Scotland. It didn't take long for Diana to discover his treachery. "What really galled me was when Diana and Charles would visit friends for a country weekend, and Diana would leave early to take the boys to school," recalled one of her friends. "Diana would go through one gate and Camilla would enter through another." Andrew and Camilla Parker Bowles announced their divorce in a statement from their lawyers on January 10, 1995. "Throughout our marriage we have always tended to follow rather different interests," they said with admirable understatement, "but in recent years we have led completely separate lives." The family home was sold and Camilla moved 5 miles away to Lacock, one of England's most picturesque villages. By then, she'd lost a lot of money at Lloyd's of London, so her devoted friend Charles Halifax, the 3rd Earl, set up a trust fund to finance the purchase of her £1 million home, a mid-19th century stone house amid 27 acres, complete with swimming pool. Charles oversaw the design of her new garden and arranged for flowers, trees, and bushes to be transported from Highgrove in a horse trailer. In addition, he had a security system installed and helped with some minor upgrading such as new windows and lighting fixtures. After Diana's famous Panorama interview, in which she complained that there were 3 people in her marriage, Camilla was, in effect, under house arrest, as her friend Charles Benson put it. She could attend parties given by close friends, but had to sneak in through back doors. And when Charles visited her, he was reduced to hiding under a blanket on the back seat of his car. Diana's death changed everything, and Camilla agreed to follow a finely calibrated PR campaign to bring her gradually out into the open. Behind the scenes, the prince's staff soon realized she wielded a great deal of clout. She saved the job of Charles's much-disliked valet Michael Fawcett, for instance, after complaints about his rude and abusive behavior. All it took was a plea to her lover to reconsider his acceptance of Fawcett's resignation. "She was wearing the trousers, and he would tell you that," said one of his top officials. Refreshingly for Charles, Camilla had no need to explain herself or beg for approval, as Diana had done. "I was always brought up to get on with life and not sit in a corner and weep and wail," she told a friend. Setting a pattern that would continue after their marriage, she preferred to spend most of her time at her own country home. There, she could be as untidy as she pleased, ignore the torn carpets, lounge around in comfortable clothing and freely indulge her Marlborough habit. She also liked to entertain on her own, giving intimate, casual lunches that she often cooked herself. Despite this, however, a few of her friends privately complained that she'd become terrifically grand. As for Charles, he still adored her, yet bizarrely seemed in no hurry to make an honest woman of his lover. In 2004, 7 years after Diana's death, it was his staff who took the initiative, conferring with government and church officials to create a path to the altar. "Getting him married wasn't easy," said a longtime Clarence House advisor. "The prince was perfectly happy the way it was." The Queen, for her part, was genuinely pleased when the couple finally tied the knot. She liked Camilla's down-to-earth unfussiness and her love of dogs. The 2 women spoke regularly on the phone and the Queen shrewdly started using her as a conduit to her complicated and often angst-ridden son. Did Prince have a secret fling with a high-flying blonde? The Princess of Wales suffered, perhaps unfairly, from being portrayed as a woman with many lovers, while her husband remained faithful to just one. But was Prince Charles really so devoted to Camilla Parker Bowles that his attention never strayed? In 1993, after the Prince and Princess had separated, he hired his friend Robert Keim, an interior designer, to expunge all traces of Diana from Highgrove. And it was Keim who was also responsible for introducing a new unofficial advisor into Charles's court, a marketing maestro called Susan Townsend. A pretty blonde with bright blue eyes, she was the antithesis of the serious-minded men and women around the prince. She was saucy and stylish, as comfortable in short skirts and a low décolletage as she was in jodhpurs, and she shared his love of Aston Martins. At 43, Susan was a year younger than Charles. She was also a highly successful businesswoman, having been a founder of Crabtree and Evelyn, with more than 170 shops in 6 countries. Her first impression of Charles, when Kym brought her to dinner at Highgrove, was that he was perfectly charming. The sentiment was clearly reciprocated, because he asked Susan to set up a gift shop at Highgrove in Gloucestershire. She duly converted a garage on the estate into a shop selling products from royal warrant holders. And then the prince asked her to help out with a new souvenir shop at Buckingham Palace as well. This new project involved regular meetings with Charles, Kym, and Debo, the Duchess of Devonshire, in the Chinese dining room at the palace. There, they would examine the various items being suggested for sale in the palace shop. At first Charles thought he could veto everything they sold, which was a bit ambitious, recalled Townsend, pictured, left, in 1997. Debo Devonshire would then pitch in, asking, "Well, are they cheap?" When told they were, she'd shake her head and say, "There is nothing to be done." At which point, the prince would groan and say, "How awful." 3 years later, Charles sought Susan's advice again when his Duchy Originals food brand started piling up too much debt. After becoming a director of the brand in 1996, she helped him find new agricultural sources for the foods as well as new manufacturers. She also persuaded him to try to sell the products at Waitrose. "The people who shop at Waitrose were the target market," she said. The prince loved it. He had all the directors at Waitrose to tea at Highgrove. Meanwhile, Charles was enjoying Susan's companionship as well as her advice. Through him, she got to know Princess Anne, and he once invited her to travel with him to Debo's home, Chatsworth. As they spent more time together, she learned about the prince's quirks, which she remembers fondly. One day, she says, they happened to be driving in his Aston Martin convertible by the gardens across from Buckingham Palace. He frowned and said, "How horrid. He just hates those rows of red geraniums," she said. "That will change when he becomes king. But one of the problems is that he has such high taste, so above everyone else. One reason the Queen is so popular is that she is much more ordinary in her tastes. People can relate to her, but he harks back to an earlier, grander era." Charles and Susan remained close until Diana's death in 1997, when they argued over Susan's decision to close the shop at Highgrove for the week. "I don't think he thought it through," she said. Nothing like that had ever happened before. The dispute ruptured their friendship. She resigned from Duchy Originals, moved to Italy and built up a brand of luxury bath and home products. So, was Townsend's relationship with Charles romantic? "I don't think we'll go down that road, really," she says nearly 2 decades later. "I used to spend quite a bit of time with the prince, so there we are. I don't think I'll..."